Excited to have you with us once again. Welcome to Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birka.
And I'm Gary.
So I attended a funeral this morning for somebody I worked for, not once but twice, a gentleman that I had worked for in, 1999, 2000 era, and then again in the 20 teens, radio manager, and he passed away, and this morning was his funeral. And I found myself really reflecting on funerals in general, about what gets said, who's in attendance, how a life is portrayed. Of course, there's always the photo montage, and there's the stories that come up that not everyone knows about, and the little details that happen. And he was a big enthusiast of all things islands, and so they passed out leis, like artificial leis for everyone, and had Hawaiian punch or something like that for the reception, and just the things that make a funeral unique to that person. And so as I was reflecting on that, we don't always know that death is coming. Many of us don't have that opportunity. We don't necessarily have a diagnosis with an end date in mind, and sometimes death comes very quickly and very unexpectedly. But if you were to know you've got X number of weeks, months, or years to live, it made me really think in a curious manner, what would that look like to plan your own funeral?
Yeah, and there's lots of exercises around this that I've done over the years. There's the one called the shield exercise, and it's kind of a get to know you exercise, team building in a group, and you put different things in different parts of the shield, like people used to have family crests with different parts that mean thing. And one of the sections of the shield was always, what would you do if you knew you only had 30 days left to live, or 60 days, or a year. And people write down their, go on cruises, travel comes up a lot. And of course, then one of the exercises is, well, if that's what you would do if you only had 30 days left, what's preventing you from doing it now? Another really good exercise is in kind of thinking about your life, and what do you want the trajectory of your life to be? What do you want your legacy to be? Is they say, fast forward to your funeral, or fast forward 30 years, what would you want people to say to you? You've just gone through the eulogies and from different stakeholders. What would you want your spouse to say about you? What would you want your kids to say about you? What would you want your employer to say about you? In other words, the different stakeholders in your life, what would you want them to say about you? From a unique standpoint, like, the guys into islands, or, every once in a while I think, anytime I go someplace, there's certain people that want something that's something from Green Bay, or there's somebody who collects frogs or ducks. And I wonder, what's my thing? What do people? But I always think about certain people because they have this collection of X, right? But the point of the funeral exercise, as it's known, is what do you want each of your stakeholders to say about you? And then the analysis is, okay, given where you are now, are you on a trajectory to where that's exactly what they would say? Or is there a gap? Or is this aspirational of how you want to be? But you're not seeing yourself in that now. Your wife would not say that today, or your children. And how do you aspire, or how do you, change your direction a little bit, tweak it at least, toward that way? And it's useful exercises if you do something with them.
Right.
Oftentimes they can just be frustrating if you think, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be able to achieve that.
Right.
Then that's not so helpful. But I think perspective is the key there.
Yeah.
What's the perspective that going to a funeral gives you?
Well, I think in my case, I can't speak for anybody else because I'm only in my own head. In my case, I sat there thinking about the different ways that we manifest ourselves to different groups of people. And we really touched on this last week in the podcast about kind of wearing different hats, different roles, and how, this man's children knew him in a completely different way than I knew him, and his wife knew him in a completely different way, and go through the list, and how interesting it was to me how we are with various groups of people in our life. And then to your point, if you're thinking ahead to, you know, what would I want to be said about me, the various eulogies that are delivered, what do I want in the photo montage? I will say this is a little tongue in cheek, but not really. I told my kids, because there just always seemed to be this series of photos about me, always cutting cakes. I was like, at my funeral, I want nothing but a montage of me cutting cakes throughout the years. Because inevitably, you know, whoever's birthday it is, they blow out the candles and the cake or the pie gets passed over to me and I'm cutting the cake. So I don't know. You know, it's a silly little thing, but it's kind of part of our family dynamic. And so I think we all have our flavors in the ways that maybe in a sweet spirited or jovial way that we want to be perceived at the end.
I hope that most of them are sweet and jovial.
Right.
I do a couple things with my kids and grandkids that you know have really stuck over the years. One is I'll say, guess what? And somebody will say, what? And I'll say, I love you. And that has really taken on a life of its own. And now often when people are getting together in large family situations, somebody will do that and I got you, right? And sometimes it's kind of funny because somebody will say, guess what, to me? And my first response is, I love you. And that's not always appropriate. And so, but you know, there's things like that. I taught one, we had some house guests this weekend, and I taught another one too, and that is, you know, whenever we're in a given situation, I'm always trying to, you know, serve the people, add value in such a way that people are having their individual and group needs met. And so one of the ways I check on that, as I say, is everybody happy? And everybody in unison says, happy. And so by the end of the weekend, Jorge and Andrea and Raphael and Leonardo were all saying, I would say that, and they'd say, happy. You know, and those are the kind of things that we can establish as traditions, as things in our lives that we are known for, that we're remembered for. I would love a montage of me saying, is everybody happy? And everybody says happy in the various situations that we've been in as a family.
Yeah. Well, and you know, you asked this question up front about, you know, what would you like to have happen at the funeral? You know, what can you do to prepare now for those things to come to pass? If people would say the things that you most would desire for them to say about you. And I do think about that. And I think about what are the characteristics that I want to be remembered by? And what are the attributes that I hope that people remember me by? And I hope one of my top ones is hospitality. And I think that's been really a focus for my husband and I, as we have always tried to have a very hospitable place in our home, and that whether that be for overnight guests or people that need to crash for a couple of weeks, or you're coming over for a meal, or you're coming over for a holiday, we have really tried to set the tone for us to be a very hospitable place. And I think by and large it's worked. And so I would hope that I'm doing the work now. Not that that was my purpose in doing it, but I do hope I'm putting in the work now so that when the time comes for my funeral, everyone would comment like, man, I always felt great in their house. I felt welcomed, I felt cared for, and I was always well fed.
It's interesting, but we do walk into various people's houses, and we won't name them on the air here, but we do sometimes walk into different people's houses, and we do feel like it's very, you know, strict or stuffy or not welcoming, and other places where you kind of almost feel instantly at home. You and Bob have a home where we feel instantly at home. And I was glad I was able to say that here. And the opposite's not true, but it is true, and you do that. And I think that's one that we can accentuate the strengths and accentuate the things that you want to do. And the flip side of that is minimizing the things that you don't want to be known for. I don't want to be a cranky old man. I don't want to be. There's many things. I was introduced last week to a phrase I'd never heard about before. It's called LTF, I think, and it's. I hope I'm getting this right. Low tolerance to frustration. And I do. I have a low tolerance to frustration, at least lower than I'd like.
Yeah.
I get frustrated if people aren't, you know, in traffic, aren't, you know, obeying the rules, if they're not, you know, being orderly, if somebody's, you know, if there's long lines of people, if people don't seem to be efficiently dealing with something, if I'm the person who's getting the end of that. And I don't want to be that way. I want to be accepting of my environment. I want to be like,
Go with the
water,
flow,
right?
Mary.
Go with the flow. And so that's something I need to work on. And when someone, when this came across my, kind of my knowledge base, this LTF thing, I started thinking, I think I'm starting to get some LTF here. And just because I think the world should work in a certain way
Yeah.
does not mean the world should work that way. And it certainly is not going to work that way. And if I'm going to get frustrated about that, probably not useful.
Yeah. There are absolutely characteristics about myself that I wish to change, and things that I know that I'm a work in progress on. And I've shared, openly that I really struggle with pessimism and, immediately kind of doomsdaying a situation, probably out of self-preservation, self-protection, but it's just one of my defaults. But by no means do I want that to be something that people remember from the stage. Like, yeah, every time something happened, she just assumed the worst, right? I mean, nobody wants to be remembered that way. And so, to your point, what are the things that you need to be working on so that that's not an area where you would be remembered by?
Or how can we turn that around in the present moment so that it's not as much of a problem? So if you know that about yourself, you could say, funny thing about me is I'm always thinking about the negative aspects. You're sitting there trying to tell me something that you want to do or something you want the group to do, and you're saying how great it would be, and I'm sitting there thinking, would it? And maybe, and you might even just say, so, my job here is to think about the things that could go wrong because I want to join you in this thing. And I want to just make sure that it goes well, and just kind of almost make a joke about it, and to say, and to realize that as much as you're pushing for this, I'm thinking of all the things that could go wrong. And so, that's a good yin yang. And this is something we could look at together. And sometimes those very things that we find in ourselves unuseful might be useful to others.
Yeah. All right. I'll take that as a half point. One of the thinkings about planning towards your own funeral, I hope, would involve relationships and things that have gone unresolved to this point. And if you're going to be intentional in the thought process of asking questions about your end date, are you asking curious questions about relationships that you have, both good and negative? And if there are some of those negative outstanding balances, so to speak, are there things that you can do to rectify that?
Yeah, and there's sometimes things that are outside of our boundaries of being able to handle.
Sure.
We certainly understand that. Sometimes things that have been done to us or situations have occurred that you just can't see it. But taking the long view on that is sometimes very useful. In other words, okay, do I still want this to be the case in 20 years?
Sure.
Is there steps I can take now to where this might resolve itself? Not tomorrow, certainly not yesterday because it hasn't happened, but maybe in a year or 5 years or 10 years. Sometimes when we take that long perspective, we say, I really don't want to die without reconciling with my sibling, for instance. I think that's something I'm going to need to try to work on. As terrible as whatever happened, can I see myself in 10 years starting to rekindle a relationship and then work from there? At least it's not forever.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that overnight transformation, but what are those entry-level steps that you can take towards meeting that end goal? Certainly. And are there relationships that have fallen by the wayside? And maybe nothing terrible happened, but just time, circumstance. Maybe you were best of friends in high school, then you moved to another state for college, or you moved across the planet for a job. Just those relationships that had been so fundamental, so important in some formative years that maybe have just been neglected because of time and circumstance. So are those relationships that you need to pursue? Is that something that would be important to you if you knew your end date?
And think about the mix of relationships. I mean, a lot of people would say that in order to predict, you're going to be in 5 years the sum of the friends that you keep today. You've heard those kinds of sayings before. But also, have you lost your accountability partner because you didn't like what they were holding you accountable for? Have you stopped calling this person anymore because they bring up this that you don't like about yourself? Or are you tending to be a little bit more melancholy and sad these days and realize that the mix of your friends has changed and maybe you should just tweak it more back towards the friends that are more positive and optimistic? Who knows? But again, examining that is the key. Asking the curious questions.
Oh, for sure. And are there things that are unsaid that need to be said? I know that for some families, the I love you expression comes very easily and is often exchanged. But in other families, it is seldom heard. And are those 3 words something that needs to be intentionally spoken when you have the moment to do it?
And there's different love languages, there's different ways of being, and there's some families that are perfectly happy, I'm sure, never having said those words in their lives. It doesn't make sense to me, but it could be, right? And so I think there's a little bit of cultural or a little bit of differences. No 2 people are the same, no 2 families are the same, certainly. But you could be the catalyst. You could be the change maker. You could be the person who starts the cycle of saying it more often. You could be that change that you want to see in your family. Some would argue that's the only thing that's going to change is if it starts with you. And what could you do if you want to influence the family? You don't want to get frustrated by saying that you can do something and it will absolutely formulaically give you this outcome. But what could you do to just kind of tweak it or to do the things that you know you need to do for your side of the street, so to speak, to facilitate trends that you'd like to see in your family? Do you want to see your family getting together more? Okay, well then, what can you do? Can you host something at your house? We just recently, for Easter, one of the siblings stepped up and said, hey, why don't we do it at my house? A lot of times in transitions in families, sometimes when the parents die, it's up to the kids now to intentionally get together. Are you seeing those trends go the way you want? Are you happy that we're not getting together anymore? And maybe there's some curious questions there. But if you'd like to have it be more like that, doesn't have to be the exact same. Might be different traditions, might be different days, different holidays, different excuses to get together. But do you want to create some excuses to get together? Same in your neighborhood. How many of your neighbors do you know? How hard is it to hang a hanger on the doors that are the 10 to 12 houses around you and say, hey, we're going to get together for a little spring fling at our house, coffee at our house from 5 to 7, just drop by and say hi. Is that something you'd like to start as a trend? And again, it's all about, I can ask myself some curious questions. If I want a certain, boy, I wish I knew my neighbors. I wish our neighborhood was a little bit tighter. Okay, what can you do about that wish?
Right. And then I think one of the last topics that comes to my mind about this kind of concept of planning your own funeral is, are there stories that you've never shared that need to be shared? And I think about, what do they call it? The silent generation or the greatest generation. My grandfather and the things that he endured in World War II that so traumatized him that he was unable or unwilling to speak a lot of these things, but were really formative into how he behaved for the rest of his life. And are there some of those stories that you've been storing away because of pain or loss or embarrassment or whatever the case is, but they're really critical pieces of your story and understanding who you are and the dynamic within your family? Is it time to share some stories? And if the answer is I can't face it or I can't bear it or it's too much, we have the technology these days that you could easily record something, in some sort of a drive, a cloud, a whatever. You could certainly, if you needed help professionally, you could hire a videographer and make arrangements. I need to share this, but it's not to be made available to my family until my passing. And you could definitely take advantage of time, advancements in time with technology, I guess is what I was trying to say.
And I think that comes back to asking the curious question. Do I think it would be useful to me or my fellows, my family, if I were to share this? Do I need to do some healing internally? or is this something I just can't do right now? Well, I mean, it's important to have certain internal boundaries. I think also. I mean, I suffered a severe loss in my life at one point, and you know, I knew there was just no doubt in my mind that I could not let the whole thing wash over me all at once. I had to let it come around in stages. But I also knew I eventually had to deal with all of it. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that happens? Now, in the situation with severe trauma and you just can't face it, you know, maybe sometime who are we to say maybe it is better left alone.
Possibly, yeah.
If it's having negative consequences though in your relationships, and there's times when you're feeling not useful or melancholy or depressed, and you think it's something that you should deal with, you know, maybe it's time, as you said. You know, what are those things that you have not told anybody that might be good for you or others to say?
And I think about those that really try to walk in humility and they don't want to brag or they don't want to promote themselves. But there are certain accolades and awards and things that have happened in the past of a parent or a grandparent that you may not have known about that would really make a tremendous impact on your kind of family narrative. You know, that so-and-so won a silver medal or a silver star. Somebody competed in some category and won this prize, or they were an innovator and they created this and had a patent or whatever. You know, those things that maybe are closely guarded areas of pride, but might really benefit and bless a family to hear it.
It's funny you say that because just this weekend I was with a group of friends, and one of them related the story about how they were a walk-on to UNM soccer. And UNM soccer in its heyday, they were, you know, ranked
Tough team.
as a program, and I had no idea. And then the person said that they were told at one point after a red card that they might be better at rugby, and then ended up playing rugby in college. But I never knew that whole aspect about this person. Would have never guessed it.
Sure.
And I have a newfound appreciation, you know. And so I think sometimes sharing aspects of our lives that people. There's a fun little game called Two Truths and One Dare, or no, Two Truths and One Lie. And what you do is you try to make the truths as outrageous as possible, telling things about yourself that nobody knows, and then the lie is something that's just, you know, something silly, so that you get them to, you know, which one's the lie, and you try to motivate them to guess the wrong one. And I think those games are just a whole lot of fun because what comes out, oh, I was a clown in a Bavarian circus, or you know, I played golf at midnight with my son somewhere because it was Iceland after, you know, the sun is at midnight. But anyway, the point is those kinds of things are really good. But the curious questions here are, what are things I don't want to literally take to my grave?
Yes.
And how do I want to be seen at the end of my life in total?
Yes.
And what legacy do I want to leave? What impressions do I want to leave? How do I want to have added to people's lives? And am I doing that now?
Excellent, curious questions. And we, by all means, welcome you to add your own. I love when we get feedback. Thank you to those of you that comment on the YouTube channel. Please keep them coming so you can, of course, find us on YouTube and all of the major streaming platforms for audio. I cannot see the comments on audio, so if you've got something, please send it my way through the Curiosity Not Judgment website. There's a great way to get in touch with us right there. But I think this is some good food for thought as we think about our own funeral, not in a morbid way, but just to ask those curious questions in preparation to make sure that we're not missing something important.
Well said.
All right. Well, y'all have a great week, and we'll catch up next time.
Take care.